I'm Will Hanson, and welcome to the Experts in the Room podcast, brought to you by Extreme Push. In this series, we chat to some of the leading minds working in the customer experience, retention and data space in some of the most competitive and fastest growing industries in the world. In this episode, The Full Experience, I spoke with CCO of Shape Games, Morten Tonnesen. Morten is one of the most experienced executives in the sports betting and gaming industry, former PokerStars Director of Marketing, having led the widely successful operator business BetWarrior, and then moved into the B2B world of Shape Games. He's done it all. We touch on the wider industry opportunities and challenges and the innovation, product and services that will set operators up for success in 2023. If you have any passing interest in the sports betting and gaming industry, this is the podcast for you. Welcome to Experts in the Room. Today I've got one of the best in the business as far as iGaming goes, Morten Tonnesen, COO of Shape Games. I'd list off all of your experience, Morten, but we'd be here for probably 15, 20 minutes just doing that. But really happy to have you on the podcast today. We've got some great topics to cover, so you're very welcome.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the flattering.
Well, we only get the best and the brightest experts in here, so I've seen you talk a few times before, so I am excited to kind of dig into it and talk about Shape and what you're doing in the industry and what you're seeing. It'd be great to maybe just get a little bit of an overview, Morten, of your background. Like you've had a varied background working on both the operator side and the supply side within iGaming. So maybe if we could just get a brief intro from you as to how you started in the industry and where your career has kind of gone, that would be a nice way to set up for today.
Yeah, let me start. So way back when I used to be the youngest man in the room. Now I seem to always be one of the older guys, but that's the nature of the beast. No, so I was in management consulting for many years after finishing business school. And part of that was in the early days of big data, which of course is something that Extreme Push looks into and this industry keeps striving towards. And I heard of PokerStars and was introduced, and they had issues on their CRM side. So I came on board to run CRM for PokerStars. To cut a long story short, when I joined PokerStars, it was a downloadable desktop app where you played poker with no mobile, no casino, no whatever. Not even, you couldn't even play on web. You had to download the app on your desktop. So fast forward 7 years, I started with a team of 5 people. I finished there with a team of 400 plus people and budgets of $160 million marketing, and had taken what was a basic setup for CRM and basic from a technology standpoint, and rolled out mobile, casino, sportsbook. When we launched mobile, for example, there was no cashier in the app and many other interesting stories, which today would be ludicrous to consider.
Unforgivable.
Yes, indeed. But people still just signed up and went and downloaded the desktop app and deposited and everything else. So had a great experience rolling out across many markets, launching many. It was during the licensing period in Europe, mainly, where you saw France, Spain, Italy, and so on go live in that period. And then PokerStars was sold, 4.8 billion. Mark and Isai made a lot of money. And then it became a bit corporate for me in the end, and wanted to try something different. I popped out and I met Shape, which wasn't Shape Games at the time. And they had built a product for Danske Spil, which is the state-owned monopoly, or former state-owned monopoly in Denmark before deregulation. And I saw what they'd done and found it interesting, and decided to go out and see if I could find some money and launch B2C on the back end of that, which became and still is BetWarrior. So I spent time building BetWarrior from the beginning, defining the name and everything else, and taking that to markets. It was very early on. This year, everyone talked about Latin America, and we launched, based on that, we launched with the aim of Brazil and everything else back then. And now, of course, the BetWarrior has been regulated in Argentina and has grown from strength to strength and have some very, very strong numbers. Then I saw that, B2C in Latin America would take time because, as we know, in that part of the world, things don't necessarily go as quickly as structured as we wanted to. And then I had seen the opportunity in the US with the platform, and I decided to say to the guys that had invested in BetWarrior, why don't you either we do B2B, and they were more keen on doing business for themselves than business for others. So I said, why don't you buy me out? And I made an agreement with the Shape guys to create Shape Games and then go to market with that. And the next client we signed was BetJack in Ohio, which went live in January, which is a joint client between Shape Games and Extreme Push and Canby.
There's the plug for Extreme Push. I like that. Done early exactly. in the podcast, but that's a great show, shared client there. But and then obviously Canby involved there as well.
And then for the past couple of years we built that, which happened very quickly in many ways. It was very clear that, how should I say, we came with with a perspective of the app side, which no one had really and still hasn't, other than us, productized in a way that you ensure that you can go to market with a quality product that's fully natively built. And that's what we're still seeing a strong demand for. And on top of that, we also have built out other services, which is sort of complementary between the space, which is something I'm sure we'll come back into in terms of capturing data, reporting on data and actioning on data, which many of the bigger operators and operators in general has a challenge with. But that's me. And now I'm sitting here. We then, back in the last year, which is less than 6 months ago, then sold Shape Games to Canby. So now we are part of the Canby group with Ep1, which is esports, and then Canby with a strong sports book. So that's me. Slaving away on that.
You're slaving away. Yeah, slaving away with two good exits, I'm sure. So that's excellent. I think it's really interesting that the breadth of your experience on sitting on both the operator side and obviously the big side with guys like PokerStars, and that story about how you grew that team up to 450 and the budgets. Like, I can still remember being, I think, a probably 16-year-old downloading that web browser app onto my computer at home and playing on PokerStars. So it's mad. That would have been back in Brisbane, and I know exactly the experience, and I'm sure there's plenty of people my age that would have had their first foray into poker when it was becoming prime time at that period. So anyway, just as an aside, so I think that's a great example of spotting a gap in the market and then moving into B2B with Shape, and the whole piece about making sure that you got functional products like the apps that are ready to go to market, I think is so important. You can see the operators that either win or lose based on that, purely from a customer experience perspective. I'd love to hear about how you think kind of the changing nature of those products and what people are offering is important. I know I've heard you speak before about the kind of trap that brands are getting into, being too transactional and not looking at customer experience, and that comes from having a good product, but also being able to kind of action your data. So it'd be cool to get your opinions on that, Morten, and what's kind of coming for iGaming in the future.
Yeah, no, for me, it's been the early days of sports betting and also casino. Generally, right now, the world seems to be very focused on sports betting, or at least has been. Now there's a bit more iGaming, based on the US boom that happened over the last few years. But generally, taking the initial products of Sky Bet, Bet365, and so on, it was and is fairly transactional, right? You go in, you look a bit around, you place a bet, and you leave the product, and that was about it. Now, of course, over this journey, streaming has come along, but streaming, it's difficult from a rights standpoint. Very few of the operators can actually stream the Champions League final at the time of the Champions League final, right? So it's more peripheral content that's streamable. But what we basically say, and how I see it, which is super important, I believe, is that we as operators in the space generally compete for share of time. We don't only compete against other betting companies, right? We compete against Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Netflix. The list is longer than we can spend the next 40 minutes talking about, right? So how does an operator with a transactional product get to ensure that they get more share of time? Because in general, you get more share of time, you get more share of wallet, right? So the way we have looked at that is saying that you need to have your streaming, you need to have statistics, especially in the US market. Sports is a numbers game. People crave to understand how many touchdowns has this player done, how many yards have he run, so on and so on and so on. And if you don't have that in your product in a good way, then you don't cover things. I think we also, for some of our clients, have started to build in the ability to push news into the product, i.e. sports news and so on, either self-generated, which has on web other opportunities of then building out SEO, but also partnerships that companies that we work with have with ESPN and others to again make sure that's the case of having a more holistic offering within the product. And then on top of that, most companies have not done this, but having the ability for the bettor or the punter to see a bit more about what they do in the product, what are their favorite things to do, what are the records they've done, which from social gaming and other parts and other verticals have been very normal, but hasn't really been picked up by our category. And we've also built in, a small social network. We saw that, especially in sports betting, but also more and more in casino world, iGaming, that bettors love to share things with their friends because that's what the nature of things are today in terms of Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever. And they would screenshot the bet slip and then share it in a WhatsApp group and whatever. And we said, why not deliver that functionality within the product again to have that little bit more lock-in effect, right? So those are all the areas that we are seeing are important in order to have a more holistic product that has more of a lock-in effect than what we've seen with the historical transactional product. And there are things that we will bring to market and others will bring to market that will enhance that even more. But I think that trend is super important. Yeah. And we're in the middle of it and it will continue to progress further. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting topic and particularly in and around the changing nature of the demographic for people that are betting and being online, right? Like, as you said, in the gaming community, when I talk about the gaming community from like a computer gaming community, like you see the success of platforms like Discord and stuff, and they're all built around sharing and having leaderboards and community-based actions. And you can see that when you're in the apps, you know, you go into Paddy Power's app and it's very transactional. That's all it's doing. At the moment, you're not really doing it on a share basis. And the US is a prime example of where they're probably doing it a bit better, I think, on that perspective because of the background with what they've had. I think what also is interesting is the idea around keeping players engaged when they're not betting as well, and that kind of convergence of media, but also free to play. I think is a really interesting place that's expanding at the moment within the industry. In possibly a good way to keep people engaged, as you say, for share of time. Is that the type of stuff that you guys are looking at for Shape in the future, or are you focusing on other areas?
Yeah, so good point. So that was probably the last bit that I didn't mention in terms of all the other aspects I mentioned was in relation to the real money product. But actually, based on my experience from PokerStars, we always offered free-to-play poker and real money poker side by side in the same product, even the old downloadable desktop app. And I've always wondered why no one took that into sports betting or even casino, because in most cases that has been either a fantasy setup or a different app or a different product with a different login, user ID, and so on. And to me, it just makes it more complicated for the user to utilize it. Maybe some have felt maybe it's going to cannibalize my real money revenue because if people can bet for fun, then maybe they'll spend more time there, and as a consequence, they won't get the share wallet and so on. Now I see it, directly opposite. That there's so many advantages in having free-to-play in the same product. First and foremost, if you go into a market like US, where all states betting has been illegal from a digital perspective for as long as anyone can go back and remember in terms of the generations other than on horse racing, offering a free-to-play product is like a place where people can learn and understand more about what's going on. Then on top of that, for many of the brands that wants and has aspiration of launching but are not yet launched and wants to compete with the bigger guys of FanDuel, DraftKings, and BetMGM and so on. It's a way of launching the entire tech stack prior to the regulation happening in a state. And that ensures that the product is stable and working prior to the real money launch. Here I think about the extreme pushes of the world, the CRM functioning, the marketing setup functioning, your Google, SDKs, Facebook SDKs being built in, all the myriad of things that are needed in the complex world of operating a sports betting / iGaming business, that's up and running and secured. Because all that I've seen in my experience is that within the first 3 to 4 months of a launch, that's where the market shares are distributed within a market. And then if you want to change that picture, it's super expensive to change that. So with BetJack in Ohio, we've just, they launched free to play 5-6 months before real money launch, which happened. And we've had good traction on seeing them signing up a lot of customers now. And we believe that that's a model to follow. But even in markets where, how should I say, that you are live, I still think it's a good add-on to the product to utilize, to offer to your customers, for them to play around and experiment and see things, because not everyone has unlimited wallet to spend in a month, and people run out of money. And if they still want to be engaged in the conversation around sports in the product, it's good to have it as a free-to-play setup. So for sure, we see that as something that's even more in demand and will grow as one of the engagement factors over and above the rest of the things I mentioned.
I think that's a really nice segue to kind of get into the weeds here on a couple of questions that I want to ask you. Like that free-to-pay piece and where you're talking about having it in one environment, so important. We see and work with so many operators that have silos within their business for their data, either driven by legacy stacks or teams not being able to get access to things that they need. As Shape, how important is that for you guys to kind of enable brands to be able to access data, or how important do you think it is for both retention and CRM teams, but across the business function, to kind of have data that's accessible, it's usable in real time, that then drives customer experience? Because I think that's at the center of it. I think we're swimming in big data, but it needs to be actually driving something that's of value to the player.
Yes, exactly. And so we build our product as a canvas where we can run a lot of modules on top. So we've actually been lucky enough to do a lot of the hard work of enabling us to lay out the product in different ways. Now we're working on how we connect the data side with how laying out the product. Because for me, the two key themes that are in the industry right now and will be over the next few years, other than profitability overall, is key for all the operators.
Yeah.
Is number one. But then how is that achieved and how is that done? Now, first and foremost, it's to me, the more personal product we can deliver to the end consumer, the better. The expectation of what experiences are being delivered in the digital world has increased significantly over the last 5 to 10 years. And consumers expect a much more personal experience in terms of not having to look for what they normally buy and everything else, as we see from retail and other things. And even if they don't complete a bet, they should be able to make sure that the odds are updated and so on and so on and so on. So across the board, a personalization, and a lot of that is very hard to do if you don't control your data, right? So we see, as I mentioned previously, that many of the bigger and older operators, or some of the newer that have made less than optimal technology choices, partner choices, end up in a situation where they either have a hard time getting data collected and making sure that it's correct, right? Because there's nothing worse than, I'm not suggesting that no operators in the US don't understand and have control over the balance of the player and which bets they've done, enabling them to play that in the product. But then linking that with all the rest of the data, and then being able to push out data either to a CRM platform or to the front end and saying, I want to display this to the consumer now, whether it's a pop-up, a banner, or whatever, is sort of besides the point, but personalizing that experience and ensuring that the information is correct is something that I believe a lot of companies are struggling with. And we see, as I'm sure you do from Extreme Push and many others that I speak to within the industry, it's a big barrier to getting system live and partners live and everything else, right? And that's a key problem to solve in order to deliver a much more personalized experience for the end consumer. So overall, it's important, and we've done some inroads in that. We deliver a data solution that's not delivering CRM system or whatever, but simply make sure that we can compile and pull all the data from all aspects into one place and make sure that it's right, which should be easy, but it's actually not that easy for many operators to do. No.
It's funny. I think in the industry, it can be discussed about, but the industry itself is unique in the sense of the hurdles and the hoops that need to be jumped through by operators on the D2C side. Like you look at regulations, payments, like there is so much more that goes to it than, say, if you and I wanted to set up a nice T-shirt company and run it on Shopify and be done with it and know what our customers are doing. So I think that often gets not neglected, but maybe not talked about enough around how difficult it is. There's a reason that it's difficult, not just from a technology standpoint, but from a regulation standpoint. Is that something that you find that operators are kind of tackling in a good way or thinking about, or is it kind of, do you think it's overburdensome for brands to get working with their data and stuff like that? What's your general thoughts on that?
My experience throughout my now many years in this industry is always that out on the tech side, most of the resources gets sucked into one, launching new markets with new licensing, and number two, continuously needing to update things to comply with licensing in existing markets and across, right? A lot of resources gets used on that, and it's hard for the companies in general, big or small, to free up resources to actually deliver genuine innovation that will make a better product, more fun and engaging experience, come with new things for the consumer. And for me, the solution, especially if you're smaller, is everyone wants to own their own tech in general terms, because shareholder value, and if you have tech, then it's better and so on. But for many of the smaller operators, in order to compete with the bigger guys, to me, it's clearly better to join an ecosystem where, of course, you will have some of the challenges as well on the regulatory side and launching markets and everything else. But if there's ability to pool resources with other operators that are not directly conflicting against you, then your innovation pipeline should grow at a lower cost than if you had to take it on yourself. And that's some of what we are offering, and many third parties, B2B providers are offering. And that's why, at least as a starting point, it's a good way for small operators to go to market. Then they can, over time, if they want to in-house stuff, they can fund that via their cash flow of operation of the digital business, instead of taking a big investment up front and going to market with something that's less than optimal. So, and I think we're seeing that even some of the bigger guys have bought technology over the last 3 or 4 years and figuring out now, it's actually difficult to run and operate and to get to stitch many different systems together. And some are even looking at going back and getting B2B providers, because if you have your own tech, you have big fixed cost lines sitting in your P&L, and maybe your market share didn't grow as much as you had anticipated, and therefore profitability is not coming. So I would actually like to move some of that fixed tech stack team onto a revenue share instead, and then hit profitability earlier vis-a-vis owning my own tech. So that's some of the things that we're seeing happening in the industry right now, at least from our perspective.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I think it's probably something that's maybe not talked about enough as way to do it. And I think there is an onus on B2B suppliers as well, in where you were talking earlier about the ecosystems being built to be flexible as well, to work with each other. And the more flexibility that you can provide to operators will give you more benefit in the long run, I suspect, in building solid partnerships as well.
No, for sure. I look at it saying the bigger B2B operators, my best analogy is the supermarket model, right? Yeah. That you have a lot of different products on the shelves, but when you enter a supermarket, you're not compelled to have to buy everything in the shop, right? You can pick and choose. And we as Shape Games, having grown, we've tried to do that. We can either sell you a full solution with apps, web, retail, everything, or we can do an SDK solution where part of our product is put into your app, or we can sell you our data solution or whatever. So we very much believe that's the way to go. And more from a flexibility standpoint, from a contractual commercial standpoint, the B2Bs needs to go that way. But then also how the product is delivered, that ensures that the operator can only have to pay for what it is in the end that they'll utilize of the services. And I think in the future that you'll see, because of rights issues and everything else, that the deals where one operator you will want to have like a monopolistic contract where it's 5 years, you can only take this from us and and everything else. Those are more going to go away with more flexible terms needed to be provided. That because 5 years has always been a long time, but especially in the current environment, it's like an eon of time to sign up for. So yeah.
I want to pivot here a little bit because I'd love to pick your brain, particularly with your experience in and around the player as well, because everything that you've talked about here, that flexibility, all of the product that gets delivered by working with experts, being able to do it, I think it then comes back to delivering a better player experience to someone that's using your app as an operator. How do you kind of talk about that, maybe even at your PokerStar days when you're operating or as Bet Warrior? How are you conceptualizing that from a marketing perspective on one, brand building, looking at cost of acquisition, but then making sure that you're working with retention? Like, what type of strategies would you be giving someone that's entering that space? They've built their tech stack, they've got their partners, and they're going after market share and they're going after becoming profitable. Like, what's the number one kind of tips that you'd be giving to someone about that player experience that you need to be delivering?
Yeah. The first and foremost, you can have great tech across the board, but for some reason, most operators tend to not look at their operations from a consumer standpoint. So what do I mean by that? Yeah. In PokerStars, we introduced a concept that we called on the wall, where we simply took, if we launched a campaign, we would put everything on the wall, from each email to the TV ad to whatever, through to the sign-up journey and everything else, to ensure that things actually work. Because we tend to have a perspective where if you get a 404 in certain aspects, or you, in the sign-up process, add things in that are not needed to be there. So for me, it's all about removing friction and delivering that delightful experience of that it's within the limitations of the regulatory setup and everything else, that it's super easy to become a customer. Because in the end, most of our above-the-line marketing is about getting new customers, right? Yep. So when you've sorted that and jumped to the other side of, then you have customers, then how do you retain them? How do you get the most value out of them also in a responsible way in general? That's about understanding their behaviors. And then what many operators have done in the US especially is discounting themselves to death, right? That because of the fact that the industry in general is very transactional, poker is one of the few within the industry that has some lock-in effect, right? Because your product is better, the more consumers you have. In sports betting, it doesn't really matter how many customers you have in terms of anything, or casino in a similar way. So from my perspective on the CRM side, it's about not only having discounting as the only vehicle for retaining customers overall. And that goes from then saying we have everything in our platform, like badges, the conversation about the sports, the news, all those aspects is part of the ecosystem that makes it just that little bit more challenging for the consumer to take the discount from the other operator and move across. As well as what you guys offer from Extreme Push standpoint, or many others in the industry. It's about, I always talk about relevance as being the key part of whenever you talk to your customers, more than where historically when I was in PokerStars and other places, we send too many emails, the frequency is too high, whatever. I don't think you can send too much as long as the relevance is there. If you have an avid user that uses your product 10 times a day, and he will want new content and new things to be in the product, right? I'm sure you have your favorite sports site you go and check news on and get push notifications from and so on. You don't mind you get things when new things happen, right? So it's the same here. So those are the aspects. And then when you do give discount, bonuses, free bets, whatever it might be, let's make sure that it's relevant vis-a-vis what the customer has spent before and what the person has betted on and everything else. All of this, everyone will nod and say correct, but there are still so many companies out there in our industry that are struggling to do these. I call them, you need to deliver brilliant basics to consumers, and then on top of that, you build even more delightful experiences, and then you look across holistically and saying, in the end, I believe the ones that will win in the long term in our industry is the one that delivers a good consumer experience overall, including customer service, including easy to pay and everything else, because you get that positive network effect of people talking positively about the brand, and then, go and do this, place your bets on brand X, Y, or Z because they have this and this and this and this, and then be in touch with the consumers and understand what the consumers really want is key. So.
Yeah, a couple of points in there that I really like. The frictionless piece, like I think that is just that's gold dust. Like that is so important. We all know that friction. I tell an anecdote now. I put a bet on the Six Nations on the weekend with one of the big Irish bookmakers in their app, Mr. Power. If you're listening, please don't come to my door. But an anytime try scorer scored before halftime. Andrew Porter, well done for the Irish team. But no reconciliation on the bet till an hour after the game, which obviously as an operator fault just hasn't happened. Something's gone wrong on the trading side, which is fine. But such a missed opportunity then for me to then potentially put a bet on the next game, which is the Scotland game that comes after it. Customer service experience was great. You ping straight into their app. They go, oh, yeah, we've seen that. Sorry, it was just an error. It's in your account now. The ability for a brand then to understand that player that's betting and deliver something in situ to me the next time I'm in the app because of that experience, that's a data story being put together with behavior within the app and then making it hyper-personalized. Like that to me, as someone sitting and working in that space, is going, the next time I'm in that app, if I get a pop-up that says, hey, we saw the thing with the Six Nations, here's something for the next one, or here's the next best bet for you to put on, we reckon this will win, or whatever it might be. It could be any piece of content, but just that acknowledgement. And I think exactly. I think brands are getting close, yeah.
No, and that's what creates these, you're telling it to me now, right? And then that's exactly. That's the positive story, right? I still have it like, in Spain, I live in Barcelona, right? And Uber down here is not allowed. When I'm in London or in New York or Miami or wherever, just being able to book a taxi, and it's easy and it's high quality cars you get and everything else, and it's 2 clicks and that's it, right? That's what you want to have in terms of a consumer experience, and not calling a taxi company and we don't have any cars and we'll come in whatever. It's very different worlds.
And
so agreed.
That relevance and making sure that you're taking people's time, like, and people will pay for it. Like, it's been proven. Like, you look at the brands that are making money off subscription for services that, even 4 or 5 years ago that you'd be going, there's no way that I would pay for that type of service. But because it's frictionless and because it works, people are happy to find value in that and then part with their money, whether it's for entertainment or not. And I think that's an area where the industry is getting there. I don't think it's all doom and gloom, but I think they're getting there, but it's taking time and they're catching up. But I think there are plenty of industries that are taking time to catch up with that, with the kind of digital world. So
no, for sure.
Very interesting. I'm going to switch up a little bit again. What are you looking at, either from Shape or yourself personally for the kind of coming year? I guess predictions at the moment is like, you can throw any prediction out there. It's a little bit crazy to predict anything further ahead than a couple of months. But who do you see as the big opportunities, either within the space generally, that people are going to be delivering? Maybe some of the products that you've seen coming down the line, and some of the innovations within the industry that you're expecting over the next couple of years. We've probably touched on some of it, but any specifics would be lovely.
Yeah, so if you look at from an operator standpoint, and if you focus on the US, which everyone seems to have, even though the focus seems to be shifting towards Brazil and so on, but there it's much more fragmented than US, right? It seems like especially FanDuel and BetMGM are doing really well in North America, with DraftKings doing less well, in my opinion, both on the consumer experience as well as financially and everything else, right?
Yeah.
So one thing that we saw from a Shape Games Canby standpoint on the Super Bowl is the ability for the consumer to much more build their own bets via Bet Builder. And what I think is that I push 2 things as the trends of the industry. One is the personalization. The other one is the ability to give consumers flexibility, right? That they can more tailor their SKUs, right? What in the end, the markets that are available are like the products that are for sale in a retail world, when you took the T-shirt as an example, right?
Yeah.
And where you might have 50,000 opportunities to buy things in a sports book today, I think that will exponentially grow, because it will almost become indefinite, because the consumer can bundle up bets and do things and everything else in so many ways in the coming 12 to 24 months that we don't see today. and that we haven't seen before. And that is exciting to me, because giving the power to the consumer, both in terms of what they want to spend their money on, and even more so how the experience should be, needs to be much more laid out. I also think there's convergence happening. So in the industry, we've always talked about, in an app or whatever, there's sports betting, there's iGaming or casino, whichever we call it, and there's different tabs and everything else and so on, right? That's, like, to me, an archaic way of looking at the world, right? If I'm in a state in the US, or if I'm in a market in Europe, I like to play blackjack and bet on the Premier League. That's what needs to be on the home screen when I get to the product, not that I need to click in 2 tabs and whatever, and I should be doing it in screen. I should be able to play blackjack whilst I'm watching streaming and all these type of things. So I think those are the ways of the industry, and the winners are the ones that will take more market share, are the ones that has the ability to deliver that technical solution that enables both the personalization and flexibility for the consumer overall. And we're seeing some of that. FanDuel's consumer experience is significantly better than many of the others in the marketplace. And the only way for the smaller guys to compete is to join a network with other operators via a B2B provider like we provide and others in the marketplace, to ensure that they have a competitive product that can go out and compete with the guys who has, of course, on a nominal and percentage-wise, much more money to invest into product than they would have themselves. So,
yeah, and I think we'll find there'll be a particularly in the US market, as the early adopters get chased by the next phase of brands that come into there, there'll be a good opportunity for niche guys to come in and secure market share by offering something that is a little bit different but really plays to certain strengths. I think that's a really good area that I'd be looking at too. Just in the idea of, you're getting a better, unique experience on something that you want as your personal one, like you've used there. If you're in the US but you only follow European football, you're probably not going to want to be inundated by the NFL like DraftKings will be pushing to you. So I think that's an interesting one, and being able to do that hyper personalization. It all comes back to data, obviously. So
indeed, yes.
We'll get back to that, but some great tips there. We're kind of coming towards the end of this now. It's been really good talking to you, Morten. I think there's so much more that we could go down, and we could probably talk for a couple of hours on the podcast. But maybe some closing thoughts on Shape Games and what's in store for you guys as a team as you head into the year. Might be a good way to kind of finish this one up.
Sure. So we are looking at we're lucky that we tend to not have that much competition, because not that many has succeeded in productizing the app side of the business. So overall, we see still very strong demand. We feel we are still have a lead on product. The acquisition of Kambi has enabled us to now be able to do even more on the innovation side. So we have a few gaps towards the functionality that Kambi offers in their web product. So we are catching up on that. But we have a number of things, for obvious reasons, that Kambi's web product doesn't have. So on balance, we are still both ahead of the Kambi web product, but also ahead in the marketplace in general. And now we're looking at putting even more and interesting product features to market over the coming months, and bringing, hopefully, and as we see that we've signed a few of them, even more clients to market. And we keep growing the team, which gives more opportunities for people internally and everything. So we're lucky, even in an uncertain world as it is right now. We seem to have a very strong trajectory, which is exciting to be part of. And then, of course, the integration of us into Kambi. We're still independent in its nature, but we're, of course, very core part of Kambi's offering now and in the future. So we keep coming closer and closer together, and which will enable us to hopefully push out many more product innovations over and above what we have done historically when we work close together between the sportsbook and the front end, even more so than we've done in the past. So overall, we have exciting opportunities coming up for us.
Excellent and exciting opportunity for anyone that partners with Shape Games, and I'm sure you'd be very open to any contact for anyone that's coming through the podcast after listening today. Morten, been excellent having you on the podcast. Thanks for joining us on Experts in the Room. Really good show, and I hope everyone enjoys listening to it as much as I did listening today.
Thanks, Will.